humans discovered the truth, and the slavers never had a chance. The cargo ship shuddered as alien clamps pierced its hull. Captain Jake Morris watched his crew freeze at their stations, faces pale under the emergency lights. He had heard the stories, dismissed them as paranoid fiction from the outer colonies. Now those stories were becoming his reality. The boarding party moved through the corridors with practiced efficiency. Their exoskeletons hummed, weapons trained on every doorway. Jake counted 12 of them, each standing nearly 8 feet tall in their armor. The lead slaver removed its helmet, revealing a face that resembled a hairless canine with too many teeth. "Humans," it said in broken English, the translator, chip in its throat clicking. "You come now, resist and die." Jake's first officer, Lisa Grant, started to reach for the emergency beacon. A plasma bolt vaporized the console before her fingers touched it. The smell of melted plastic filled the air. I said no resist. The slaver gestured with its weapon. "You worth credits alive? Dead. You worth nothing. Choose." They were herded into the cargo bay where the rest of the crew already stood in frightened clusters. Jake counted heads. 23 people, ranging from teenage apprentices to his gray-haired engineer Pete Sullivan, all of them looking to him for answers he didn't have. The slavers worked quickly, clamping neural inhibitors around each person's neck. When the cold metal touched Jake's skin, his body went rigid. He could see, hear, and breathe, but his limbs refused to obey. The inhibitor sent waves of numbness through his nervous system. Good humans. Obedient humans. The lead slaver walked among them, scanning each prisoner with a handheld device. Strong backs? Clever minds. You bring good price at Market Station Theta. One of the younger crew members, a cargo handler named Danny Cruz, managed to speak through gritted teeth. "Earth will come for us." The slaver laughed, a sound like gravel in a disposal unit. "Earth? Your planet is far. Your government is slow. We take humans for 50 cycles now. No one stops us. No one cares." They were dragged onto the slaver ship, thrown into cells that stank of fear and unwashed bodies. Jake hit the floor hard, his inhibitor finally releasing enough for him to move his arms. Around him, others were regaining partial mobility, enough to sit up and look around. The cell already held occupants. A woman with haunted eyes sat in the corner, her clothes torn and filthy. She looked up at the new arrivals with something between pity and resignation. "First time?" she asked quietly. Jake nodded. "Been here 4 months," she said. "Name's Kelly Wright. Used to run a mining operation on Titan's moon. They hit us during a crew rotation." How many of you survived?" Kelly's expression darkened. "I'm the only one left from my ship." The others fought back. Jake felt his stomach twist. He looked at his crew, saw the same realization dawning on their faces. They were merchandise now, nothing more, and fighting meant death. The slaver ship jumped to faster-than-light speed 3 hours later. Jake felt the transition in his bones, a sickening lurch that made several crew members vomit. The slavers didn't clean it up. They didn't care. Lisa crawled over to where Jake sat against the wall. Her inhibitor had loosened enough for basic movement, though her hands still trembled with residual numbness. "We need a plan," she whispered. "They have weapons, armor, and control of the ship. We have nothing. We have something they don't expect." Lisa's eyes hardened. "We have rage." Kelly laughed bitterly from her corner. "Rage doesn't stop plasma bolts, sweetheart. Trust me. I watched my entire security team try." Over the next 2 days, Jake learned the horrifying scope of the operation. The slavers spoke freely around their cargo, arrogant in their assumption that humans were too primitive to understand. But Jake had spent years in deep space, trading with dozens of species. He understood more than they realized. The galaxy had laws against slavery, technically. But enforcement was a joke. Humans were new to interstellar space, barely 50 years since first contact. No treaties protected them. No alliances demanded their fair treatment. They were unaffiliated, unclaimed, and therefore fair game. Market Station Theta specialized in exotic labor. Humans were prized for their adaptability, their ability to work in varied environments, their surprising strength relative to their size. A healthy human could fetch 30,000 credits. A skilled one, twice that. "They're taking us to the auction blocks," Kelly explained during one of the feeding times. "Bars through the cell bars, like feeding animals at a zoo. You'll stand on a platform while buyers inspect you. Check your teeth, your muscles, your responses. They'll bid, someone will win, and you'll belong to them." "For how long?" Danny asked, his voice shaking. "Until you die or they sell you again. Most don't last 5 years. Pete Sullivan, who had been silent until now, spoke up. His voice was steady despite the fear in his eyes. "There has to be a way out. Every system has vulnerabilities." "Not this one," Kelly said. "The inhibitors track your vital signs. If they detect aggression or elevated stress beyond normal fear, they tighten. Push too hard, and they'll crush your spinal column." "I've seen it happen." But Pete wasn't listening. He was studying the cell bars, the inhibitor on his wrist, the patrol patterns of the guards. Jake recognized that look. His engineer was working a problem. On the third day, the ship docked at Market Station Theta. The prisoners were pulled from their cells and lined up in the corridor. Jake got his first look at the broader operation and felt his blood run cold. Hundreds of humans filled the holding areas. Men, women, even children. Some wore the tattered remains of colony uniforms. Others were in civilian clothes, clearly grabbed from passenger ships or settlements. Their eyes held varying degrees of broken hope. A slaver in ornate armor walked down the line, appraising each prisoner with clinical detachment. When it reached Jake, it grabbed his jaw and forced his mouth open, examining his teeth like checking a horse. "This one is prime. Good bone structure. Signs of command experience. He will bring excellent price." They were herded onto hovering platforms that floated through the station's marketplace. Jake had never seen anything like it. The station was massive, a twisted parody of a shopping mall that stretched for miles in every direction. Vendors sold everything from weapons to forbidden technology to living beings. The human auction area occupied an entire district. Hundreds of potential buyers crowded around multiple stages, where humans stood under harsh lights while auctioneers called out bids in a dozen languages. Jake's group was pushed into a preparation room. Handlers stripped them, hosed them down with freezing water, and forced them into simple gray jumpsuits that left little to the imagination. The jumpsuits had numbers printed on the back. "Your lot 47, a handler said in accented English. It was a smaller alien, reptilian with quick movements and dead eyes. "When your number is called, you walk onto the stage. You stand still. You answer questions if asked. You do not speak otherwise. Break these rules and your inhibitor activates." "Understand?" They nodded, having learned that verbal responses were optional. The first of their group was called. It was Danny. He walked onto the stage like a man heading to his execution. Through the transparent wall, Jake watched the auction. The bidding was fierce. Danny sold for 42,000 credits to a mining consortium representative. One by one, his crew was taken. Lisa fetched 50,000 from a factory owner. Pete went for 60,000 to someone who wanted a personal engineer. Each sale drove the knife deeper into Jake's heart. Then it was his turn. He walked onto the stage, blinking against the lights. The crowd below was a sea of alien faces, some curious, some calculating, all seeing him as property. The auctioneer began speaking rapidly. The bids came fast. 70,000, 80,000, 90,000. The price kept climbing. At 120,000 credits, a new voice cut through the auction house. It spoke in perfect English, amplified and cold. "This auction is terminated. By authority of the Galactic Commerce Regulation Board, all humans present are hereby confiscated as evidence in an ongoing investigation." Chaos erupted in the auction house. The slavers reached for weapons. The buyers began shouting protests. And Jake saw them for the first time. Humans in military armor, carrying weapons he had never seen before, moving with lethal precision through the crowd. The lead soldier removed her helmet. She was young, maybe 30, with cold blue eyes and a scar running down her left cheek. Her armor bore insignia Jake didn't recognize, but the flag patch on her shoulder was unmistakably Earth's. "I'm Commander Rachel Torres of the Human Defense Initiative. Everyone stays calm, and nobody dies today." A slaver raised its weapon. Rachel's team reacted instantly. 3 plasma bolts struck the slaver before it could fire, dropping it in a smoking heap. The weapon clattered to the floor. "I said nobody dies," Rachel repeated, her voice harder. "But I'm flexible on that point." The station's security forces began mobilizing. Alarms wailed through the corridors. Automated defenses activated, targeting the human soldiers. Rachel tapped her wrist computer and every single defense system shut down simultaneously. "You might want to check your network security," she said to the station administrator who appeared on a nearby screen. "We've been inside your systems for about 6 hours now. This station belongs to us, until we say otherwise." The administrator, a massive crustacean-like being, sputtered in rage. "This is an act of war. Earth will face consequences." "Earth already faced consequences," Rachel said. "You've been kidnapping our people for 5 decades. That ends today. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Right now." More human soldiers poured into the auction house. They moved through the crowd with brutal efficiency, placing inhibitors on every slaver and buyer present. The same inhibitors that had been used on human captives now locked around alien necks. Jake felt hands on his inhibitor. A soldier, barely old enough to shave, worked the lock with practiced ease. The device clicked open and fell away. The sudden return of full sensation was overwhelming. Jake collapsed to his knees. "Easy, sir," the young soldier said. "Takes a minute to adjust. We've got you." Around the auction house, hundreds of humans were being freed. Some wept. Others stood in stunned silence. A few immediately tried to attack their former captors and had to be restrained. Rachel's voice cut through the chaos again. "All freed captives, listen carefully. We have medical teams standing by. We have transport ready to take you home. But first we need information. Anyone who knows about other slave operations, other holding facilities, other ships, come forward now." Kelly pushed through the crowd, her haunted eyes suddenly blazing with purpose. "I know where they took my crew's bodies. I know the names of 3 other stations that run auctions. I know their routes, their schedules, their security protocols." "Good." Rachel turned to one of her officers. "Get her to intelligence. Full debrief." Jake stood on shaking legs. Lisa and several other crew members found him, clustering together in mutual relief and confusion. Pete was already talking to a soldier about the inhibitor technology, his engineer's curiosity overriding his trauma. "How?" Jake asked when Rachel approached. "How did Earth pull this off?" Rachel's expression was grim. 5 years ago, a colony ship called the Morning Star disappeared with 400 people on board. 6 months later, we found 1 survivor. She'd been sold to a laboratory that experimented on different species. What she told us made the entire government realize we had a problem. 1 survivor out of 400. And that started all this? That survivor was the daughter of the Secretary of Defense. Rachel's smile was sharp and cold. Turns out, touching the wrong human has consequences. We've spent the last 5 years building a fleet, training soldiers and infiltrating every major criminal network in this sector. We've been watching, learning, and waiting. Waiting for what? For enough evidence to justify what comes next. Another human officer approached, saluting Rachel. "Commander, we've secured the entire station. Total count is 2347 human captives recovered, 17 different species involved in the trafficking network. We've seized their financial records, shipping manifests, and communication logs." "Excellent. Transmit everything to Fleet Command. Tell them we're ready for Phase 2. Jake had no idea what Phase 2 meant, but the look in Rachel's eyes suggested it wasn't going to be pleasant for the slavers. The freed humans were processed quickly. Medical scans, identification verification, trauma counseling offers. Jake learned that some of the captives had been missing for over a decade. Others had been taken just days ago. The scope of the operation was staggering. As they waited for transport, Jake watched the human soldiers work. They were professional, efficient, and utterly ruthless with anyone who resisted. These weren't the peacekeeping forces he remembered from Earth. This was something new, something forged in response to humanity's vulnerability. A commotion near one of the holding areas drew his attention. A buyer was arguing loudly, demanding the return of his property, waving a purchase contract. One of the human soldiers, a massive man with sergeant stripes, listened patiently until the buyer finished. Then the sergeant smiled. "It wasn't a nice smile. Let me explain something about human law," he said. "We don't recognize contracts for the sale of people. Any people. Which means this document is worthless. But we do recognize theft. You stole human beings. The penalty for kidnapping in Earth jurisdiction is life imprisonment." "This is not Earth jurisdiction," the buyer protested. "It is now." Within hours, transport ships arrived. They weren't civilian vessels, but military dropships, armed and armored, each one capable of carrying 100 people. Jake and his crew boarded one, still processing everything that had happened. As the dropship lifted off, Jake looked out the viewport. He could see Market Station Theta receding below them, surrounded by a fleet of human warships that had appeared from nowhere. The station's defenses were completely disabled, its communications jammed, its leaders in custody. Rachel sat down across from Jake. "You're probably wondering what happens now. The thought crossed my mind. We're taking you home, all of you. But things are different now. Earth isn't hiding anymore. We're not asking for permission to exist. We're done being prey. What about the rest of the galaxy? Won't they retaliate?" Rachel's smile returned, cold and predatory. "Let them try." We've been studying their tactics, their technology, their weaknesses. Humans are very good at learning from our enemies. And we've learned a lot. The dropship docked with a massive carrier that hung in orbit like a predator waiting to strike. Jake had never seen a human vessel this size. It dwarfed the colony ships and cargo haulers he knew. This was a weapon, pure and simple, bristling with gun emplacements and missile pods. They were escorted to a briefing room where hundreds of other freed captives gathered. The walls displayed tactical maps and fleet positions. Jake recognized several locations marked in red, all of them known slave markets and trafficking hubs. Admiral Henry Blake stood at the front of the room. He was an older man, gray-haired and weathered, with the bearing of someone who had seen too much but refused to break. "Welcome aboard the Retribution," he said. His voice carried authority and barely suppressed rage. "For those who don't know me, I'm Admiral Blake. 5 years ago, my niece was taken from a mining colony. We never found her. But her disappearance opened our eyes to a truth the rest of humanity needed to understand. We are not safe. We have never been safe, and waiting for someone else to protect us is suicide." The room was silent. Every person there had their own story of loss and horror. "The Galactic Council claims there are laws against slavery," Blake continued. "They're lying. Oh, the laws exist on paper, but enforcement is selective. Species with powerful militaries and old alliances get protection. Everyone else is fair game. Humanity fell into that second category." He tapped his control pad. The displays shifted, showing financial records, communication intercepts, and shipping manifests. "We've spent 5 years infiltrating the networks that prey on us. We've identified 473 organizations involved in human trafficking. We know their leaders, their financiers, their customers. We've tracked every credit that changed hands, every ship that carried human cargo, every station that hosted auctions." More images appeared. Faces, locations, names in dozens of languages. Today was the opening move. "We've hit 12 major trafficking hubs simultaneously across this sector. We've freed over 10,000 humans and seized evidence that implicates some of the most powerful entities in galactic commerce. A freed captive, an older woman Jake didn't know, raised her hand. "What happens to us now?" "You go home," Blake said simply. "We'll provide medical care, counseling, whatever you need. But I won't lie to you. Going back won't be easy. Some of you have been gone for years. Your families may have moved on. Your old lives are gone. We'll help however we can." "And the slavers?" Kelly's voice cut through the room. "What happens to them?" Blake's expression hardened. "That depends on them. We've offered every major government in this sector a simple deal. Hand over everyone involved in human trafficking, cease all operations targeting humans, and pay reparations, or face the consequences." "Will they agree?" someone asked. "Some will. The smart ones, who understand we're serious. Others will test us. They'll think we're bluffing, that Earth doesn't have the stomach for a real fight." Blake paused, letting the silence stretch. "They're wrong." Over the next 3 days, Jake watched Phase 2 unfold. It was brutal, efficient, and terrifying in its scope. Human fleets appeared at major slave markets across 6 sectors. They didn't negotiate. They didn't ask permission. They simply took control. Stations that refused to surrender had their defenses systematically destroyed. Ships that ran were hunted down by human fighters that moved faster than anything Jake had ever seen. Resistance was met with overwhelming force, but the humans weren't indiscriminate. Civilian areas were evacuated before strikes. Medical care was provided to wounded enemy combatants. Prisoners were treated according to strict protocols. The message was clear. Humanity could be ruthless, but it wasn't monstrous. The Galactic Council finally responded. An emergency session was called. Earth's ambassador, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Hayes, stood before the assembled representatives and dropped a data packet onto the council floor. Jake watched the broadcast from the carrier's common area, along with hundreds of other freed captives. "This packet contains evidence of systematic slavery operations spanning the last 75 years, Victoria said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. "It includes the names of 347 council members or their immediate family members who profited from human trafficking. It includes financial records showing that 12% of the council's operational budget comes from taxes on slave markets. It includes communications between council security forces and known traffickers, coordinating to avoid enforcement." The council chamber erupted in chaos. Denials, accusations, threats flew back and forth. Victoria waited until they quieted. "Humanity is resigning from all council committees effective immediately. We will no longer seek permission for our actions. We will no longer accept your authority over our security, and we will no longer pretend that this body represents anything resembling justice. A council member, a floating jellyfish-like being, spoke up. You cannot simply ignore galactic law. There already are consequences, Victoria replied. They're just not falling on us anymore. For 75 years you allowed humans to be hunted, captured, and sold. You knew it was happening. Some of you profited from it. All of you allowed it to continue. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the podium. So here's the new law. Anyone who touches a human being without consent will face Earth's military. Anyone who trades in human lives will find their assets seized and their leadership in custody. Anyone who protects or harbors traffickers will be considered an enemy of humanity. No exceptions. No negotiations. Another representative, this one resembling an armored insect, clicked its mandibles. You speak as if Earth is strong enough to enforce these threats. You are one world. We are thousands, Victoria smiled. It reminded Jake of Rachel's cold expression. Then you haven't been paying attention. In the last 72 hours, we've demonstrated our reach. We've hit targets in 6 sectors simultaneously. We've seized stations you thought were untouchable. We've crippled operations you believed were hidden. And we did it all while you were sitting here, debating and posturing. She straightened, her expression shifting from anger to something colder. Humanity spent 5 years preparing for this moment. We built fleets in deep space where your surveillance couldn't reach. We trained soldiers in tactics designed specifically to counter your advantages. We infiltrated your networks and learned your secrets. We studied how you fight, how you think, how you underestimate us. The chamber had gone completely silent. You made a mistake, Victoria continued. You assumed that because we were new, we were weak. You thought our compassion was weakness. You believed we would accept our place as victims. You were wrong on every count. The council session ended without resolution. Some governments immediately began turning over traffickers, eager to avoid Earth's wrath. Others prepared for conflict, convinced that humanity was overreaching. Those governments learned quickly. A coalition of 5 species attempted to blockade human trade routes, thinking economic pressure would force concessions. Human warships tore through the blockade in under 4 hours. The coalition surrendered unconditionally, agreeing to reparations and the immediate release of any human captives in their territories. A major slave-trading empire called the Zotharan Collective issued a declaration of war, calling Earth's actions illegal aggression. Humanity's response was devastating. Every Zotharan military installation was systematically destroyed. Their fleet was reduced to debris. Their leadership was arrested and transported to Earth to stand trial. The war lasted 6 days. Jake watched it all unfold from the carrier, along with the other rescued captives. They were given the choice to remain or return to Earth immediately. Most chose to stay, wanting to see the conclusion of what had begun with their rescue. Rachel found Jake on the observation deck one evening. The carrier floated in orbit around a reclaimed station, watching human engineers transform it from a slave market into a refugee processing center. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Jake considered the question. "I don't know. A week ago, I was a cargo captain hauling supplies between colonies. Now I've been enslaved, freed, and watched my species declare war on half the galaxy. Not half. Maybe a tenth. The others are getting the message." "Will it work? Can Earth really enforce all these demands?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. 5 years ago, I was a corporate security officer on Mars. Boring work, mostly dealing with equipment theft and contract disputes. Then my brother disappeared. Colony ship, routine transport, just gone. 6 months later, we found out what happened to him. "Did you find him?" "No, but we found the auction records. He sold for 18,000 credits to a mining operation. Died 3 months later in an industrial accident. They worked him to death." Her hands clenched on the railing. "So to answer your question, yes. Earth will enforce these demands because we have to. Because if we don't, more people like my brother will die as property. More families will lose loved ones to creatures who see us as merchandise. More humans will suffer because we were too afraid to fight back." Jake understood. This wasn't just about military power or galactic politics. It was personal for everyone involved. Over the following weeks, the situation stabilized. Most major governments accepted Earth's terms, preferring negotiation to conflict. The few who resisted were dealt with swiftly and conclusively. Humanity's reputation shifted from vulnerable newcomers to dangerous adversaries. Jake and his crew were finally cleared to return to Earth. The dropship carried them down through familiar skies, past orbital defenses that hadn't existed when they left. Earth had changed in subtle ways. There was a harder edge to everything, a military readiness that pervaded civilian life. They landed at a processing center where families waited. Jake watched reunions happen around him, tears and embraces and desperate relief. Some of his crew found family waiting. Others, like Jake, had no one. Their lives had been small and isolated before capture. Admiral Blake appeared at the debriefing, personally thanking each rescued captive. When he reached Jake, the older man's expression was thoughtful. "Captain Morris, I've been reading your file. Before your capture, you ran supply routes to remote colonies. You know those regions better than most." "Yes, sir. We're expanding our reach, setting up protection networks for human settlements, establishing early warning systems, building relationships with local populations. We need people who understand life on the frontier. You want me to go back out there, if you're willing?" "Not as a cargo captain this time. As part of our protection network. You'd have military support, advanced ships, and the authority to call in help when humans are threatened." Jake thought about it. The idea of returning to space terrified him after what he had experienced, but staying on Earth, living a safe, quiet life while others faced the dangers he had survived, seemed wrong. "I'll do it," he said. Blake smiled. "Good. Report to Training Facility 7 next week. We'll get you up to speed." 6 months later, Jake commanded a patrol ship on the frontier. His crew was a mix of former captives and military personnel, all of them committed to ensuring no other humans suffered what they had endured. They investigated disappearances, tracked suspicious ships, and maintained contact with isolated colonies. It wasn't the life Jake had planned, but it was the life humanity needed him to live. One evening, while reviewing patrol reports, Lisa contacted him from her own ship 2 systems away. She had taken a similar role, unable to return to a normal life after everything that had happened. "Think it will last?" she asked. "This new order we've created?" Jake looked out at the stars, thinking about all the humans now serving throughout the galaxy, protecting their species with a determination born from suffering. "It has to," he said, "because the alternative is going back to being victims. And humanity's done with that." The slavers had taught humans a harsh lesson about the galaxy's true nature. They had shown humanity that safety was an illusion, that laws only protected those strong enough to enforce them, that compassion without power was just weakness waiting to be exploited. Humanity had learned that lesson well, and the galaxy would never look at them the same way again.